At 2:48 a.m., an extraordinary operation began in the streets of Ouagadougou. Ibrahim Traoré's special forces silently took position. Target, the international aid organization, African Development Initiative, operating in a prestigious building in the city center. But the shocking truths that would emerge tonight would expose all of the Western world's lies about Africa. Because this NGO's real activities were far more dangerous than aid, and the documents Traoré seized contained bombs that would change the continent's history. "Begin the operation," ordered Traoré, knowing exactly what they would find in the building. Weeks of secret surveillance and intelligence work had revealed the true face of African Development Initiative. This so-called aid organization was actually a sophisticated operation designed to destabilize Burkina Faso. As the first team approached the front entrance, security cameras had already been neutralized. The second team controlled the rear exit while the third team prepared to rappel from the roof. This operation was planned perfectly because the documents to be seized inside would expose the biggest scandal in African history. The first soldiers entering the building were left in shock. What they encountered in what should have been an aid organization office was nothing like they expected. Maps showing Burkina Faso's military bases hung on the walls. Files full of government officials' photos and personal information sat on desks. But most shocking were the professional intelligence equipment hidden in corner cabinets. "Commander, you need to come here." The sergeant called into his microphone because what he found wasn't just an NGO scandal but evidence of a full international conspiracy. In the hidden compartment of the cabinet was satellite phones, intelligence devices, and encrypted communication equipment. These were technologies no aid organization should possess. When Traoré entered the building, he immediately grasped the seriousness of the situation. "Collect all documents. Nothing should be lost," he ordered, because these documents would expose not just African Development Initiative's true face, but all fake NOSs across Africa. And this operation beginning tonight would expose the entirety of foreign interference on the continent. When the safe in the main office was opened with professional equipment, what emerged was incredible. Thousands of pages of documents detailed plans to overthrow the Burkina Faso government. These documents weren't just theoretical plans, but evidence of actively conducted operations. Every page contained another shock, another trace of betrayal. The first file was titled Operation Desert Storm Bina. This file detailed the stages of the plan to overthrow Traoré's government step by step. First stage, economic pressure. Second stage, media campaign. Third stage, popular uprisings. Fourth stage, military intervention. Budget was allocated for each stage. Responsible persons assigned. Schedules prepared. "Who prepared this plan?" asked Traoré while examining the documents. The answer was written in the signature at the end of the file. CIA Africa Operations Director Michael Harrison. This signature explained everything. African Development Initiative was actually serving as the center of CIA's covert operations in Africa. The second file was even more shocking, titled Burkina Faso Political Map. This file contained detailed profiles of all political leaders in the country, every leader's weaknesses, financial situation, family information, even personal scandals were listed one by one. This information was material to be used for blackmail and manipulation. Traoré's own file was particularly comprehensive under the heading, Target Number 1, Ibrahim Traoré. Incredible details about him had been gathered. His daily routine, favorite foods, close friends, even childhood memories were included in this file. Such detailed information could only be gathered through long-term surveillance and espionage. "Look at this, Commander," said the intelligence officer, indicating he had found a new file. The file titled Local Assets would create the biggest shock because it contained a list of local names working for the CIA in Burkina Faso. This list included well-known businessmen, academics, journalists, and even some government officials. When the list was examined, each name had monthly salary amount, job description, and communication code written next to it. Some names received $5,000 monthly, while others received $10,000. The highest paid person received $20,000 monthly, and this person held a very high-level position within the government. "Secure this list immediately," said Traoré, because these names posed a threat not just to Burkina Faso, but to all of Africa. These people served as CIA's eyes and ears on the continent, leaking all kinds of critical information to the US. When encrypted files on the computer were decoded, the bigger picture emerged. African Development Initiative was conducting active operations not just in Burkina Faso, but also in Mali, Niger, Ghana, and Ivory Coast. Separate coup plans had been prepared for each country. Different scenarios developed. The Mali file contained a plan called Operation Sahel Freedom. This plan included a strategy to overthrow the Mali government and break the country into pieces. Northern Mali was planned to be made into a separate state and turn it into a U.S. military base. This plan seemed to be actively implemented currently. The Niger file contained a plan to take control of uranium mines. In this plan, called Operation Yellowcake, the strategy to take Niger's uranium resources from French companies and transfer them to American companies was described. A $10 billion budget had been allocated for this operation. "Commander, look at this," said the cybersecurity expert, pointing to the monitor. Real-time communication traffic was visible on the screen. African Development Initiative was in constant encrypted communication with CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. The content of this communication was daily intelligence reports, operation updates, and instruction exchanges. The last received message was from 3 hours ago. Traoré has moved. Accelerate the operation. This message showed that African Development Initiative was aware of Traoré's plans. So the spies within the government were very active, and every step was being reported to the CIA. Cut all communications immediately. Ordered Traoré and monitor that Washington line. Record every message. Listen to every conversation. Tonight will be their last night. What was found in the basement search was even more shocking. Here was a professional weapons stock, ammunition depot, and explosive storage area. A real weapons depot had been established under the guise of an aid organization. These weapons were being stored for use during a coup. When the serial numbers of the weapons were checked, it was understood that most were U.S. military property. Some weapons were latest model assault rifles, some were professional sniper rifles, some were grenades and rocket launchers. This arsenal was enough to equip a small army. What were they planning to do with these weapons? Thought TR. The answer was written in the plans file. On coup day, these weapons would be distributed to opposition groups. Chaos would be created in the city. Then U.S. military intervention would be carried out to maintain peace. This was the African version of classic CIA tactics. The laboratory section, found on the second floor, contained chemical substances and biological samples. To understand what kind of experiments were conducted in this laboratory, an expert team needed to be called. But even at first glance, it was obvious these had nothing to do with normal aid activities. When laboratory records were examined, a terrible truth emerged here. Disease types specific to Burkina Faso were being developed. Biological weapons that would harm the local population but pose no risk to foreigners were being researched. In these research files, the project name Africa Genetic Targeting appeared. "This is now at the level of war crimes," said Traoré while examining the files. "They are planning genocide by targeting our genetic characteristics. We need to announce this operation to world public opinion immediately." The media center found upstairs contained details of propaganda operations. Fake news against Burkina Faso was being produced. Social media manipulation was being done. Public opinion misleading campaigns were being organized. Thousands of fake accounts were being managed. Millions of manipulative content were being produced. In the media operation plan, the name Operation Truth Killer appeared. In this operation, slanders would be produced about Traoré. His achievements would be devalued. His reputation among the people would be damaged. Every week, a new scandal would be invented. Every month, a new false news would be spread. Examples of fake news existed in the file. Headlines like Traoré stole millions. Burkina Faso economy is collapsing. People are tired of Traoré were ready. These news were waiting to be served to international media organizations. "So this is how they were slandering us," said Traoré angrily. "They try to overshadow every success of ours to prevent every progress we make. But now their games will end. Among the financial documents, the financing sources of the operation were also there. The list of organizations sending money to African Development Initiative included well-known U.S. foundations, European aid organizations, and even some famous names. Whether these people and organizations were unknowingly or knowingly supporting this operation was unknown. The biggest donor on the funding list was a foundation called Freedom Foundation. This foundation was sending $20 million annually, serving as the main sponsor of the operation. Among Freedom Foundation's founders were former CIA directors, Pentagon officials, and weapons company owners. The second biggest sponsor was a think tank called Democracy Export Institute. This organization was financing coup operations under the project Name-Spreading Democracy in Africa. They had allocated a $15 million budget for the Burkina Faso operation. "Track this money," said Trout to the financial affairs expert. "Every penny, where it went, how it was spent, who took it, learn everything. We will completely expose this financing network." In the personal files were the real identities of African Development Initiative employees. People introduced as field aid workers were actually professional agents, covert operations specialists, and military intelligence personnel. None had aid organization experience. All had security and intelligence backgrounds. The person introduced as Director David Miller was actually a former Navy SEAL commando. He had served 15 years in Special Forces, conducted covert operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. Before being assigned to Burkina Faso, he had participated in coup operations in Libya. Program Coordinator Sarah Johnson was an experienced female agent who had worked in CIA's Africa Division for 10 years. She had previously conducted covert operations in Congo, Sudan, and Somalia. Being an expert in this work, she had come to Burkina Faso under the guise of an aid worker, detained them all, ordered Traoré first learn who they were, in communication with from whom they were taking orders. "We will expose all connections of this network." At 6:08 am the operation was completed. Tons of documents, hundreds of files, and thousands of digital records had been seized from the African Development Initiative building. This material would expose the biggest espionage scandal in African history. Traoré immediately called an emergency press conference. The meeting, held at the Presidential Palace at 10:01 a.m., was attended by all local and international media representatives. Traoré's statements were ready to shake the world agenda. "Dear citizens and world public opinion," Traoré began his speech. "Tonight we expose the biggest espionage operation in Burkina Faso's history. We dismantled a terrorist organization trying to destroy our country under the guise of an aid organization." He then distributed photocopies of the seized documents to press members. Journalists in the hall were shocked as they examined the documents. These documents were alarm bells not just for Burkina Faso, but for all of Africa. This so-called aid organization, called African Development Initiative, was actually CIA's Covert Operations Center, continued Traoré. It was established to destabilize our country, overthrow our government, steal our resources, but now their games are over. International media representatives began asking questions. BBC correspondent asked, "Can you prove these claims?" Traoré showed CIA signed documents in response. CNN correspondent said, "America denies these allegations." Traoré replied, "The documents are there. Their lies don't hold anymore." Al Jazeera correspondent asked, "Are there such operations in other countries too?" Traoré said, "Yes, similar operations are being conducted across Africa. We will expose them all." After the press conference, Traoré announced that he had officially closed African Development Initiative and expelled all its personnel from the country. He also announced that other foreign organizations engaged in similar suspicious activities would be audited. The reaction from America was swift. State Department spokesperson made a statement. "We completely reject this allegations. Burkina Faso is harming democratic processes." But now the documents were there. Lies weren't holding. France also reacted. "Burkina Faso is acting contrary to international law, targeting aid organizations," came the statement. But it was understood from documents that French intelligence was also involved in the operation. The AU also made a statement. "We condemn the attack on civil society organizations. Burkina Faso is moving away from democracy. But it was clear that EU countries had also supported this operation. Reactions from African countries were very different. Ghana's president said, "We support Traoré. Foreign interference in Africa must end." Mali's leader made the statement, "Similar operations should be investigated here too." Niger's president said, "These documents opened Africa's eyes. Now we know their games." Senegal's leader called, "All African countries should unite on this issue." On social media, the hashtag #AfricanDevelopment scandal became trending. Millions of Africans indicated they supported this operation. Messages like, "Finally the truth came out. Africa is awakening. Enough already" were shared on Western social media. A different campaign was launched. Messages like, "Traoré is a dictator. Burkina Faso democracy is in danger. Aid organizations are under threat" were spread. But this time, the African people weren't falling for manipulations. After African Development Initiative's closure, similar organizations also became anxious. Many NGOs announced they were voluntarily suspending their activities. Although they made statements for transparency, the real reason was fear of being caught. Traoré announced he would continue the operation. "This is just the beginning," he said. "We will audit all suspicious organizations in our country. We will clean our Africa. We will expel thespies." After this statement, dozens of foreign organizations began leaving the country on their own. They stopped their operations, citing security concerns. Their real reason was fear of being caught. The seized documents were also submitted to the African Union. The African Union called an emergency meeting to address the issue. A decision for joint struggle against foreign interference in Africa was taken. Following this decision, many African countries began examining suspicious NGOs on their soil. 5 organizations in Ghana, 3 organizations in Mali, 4 organizations in Niger were closed. Amateur cleanup movement had begun across Africa. A month after the operation, its effects were still continuing. In Burkina Faso, people continued to support the closure of African Development Initiative. Messages like, "Thank you for cleaning our country of spies. We're coming." Traoré's courage also inspired other African leaders. Now operations coming under the guise of aid were viewed with suspicion. Every project was carefully examined. African leaders began saying, "Now we know their games." In the international press, the campaign continued. Headlines like "Traoré attacks democratic values, authoritarian wave in Africa," "Civil society organizations in danger" were being published. But now the African people weren't believing these manipulations. The African Development Initiative scandal had become a turning point in African history. Now every operation coming under the name aid would be questioned. Every NGO would be audited. Every project would be analyzed. Africa had begun to be cleaned of spies and manipulators. Traoré's operation had not only closed an NGO, but ensured the exposure of an entire system. Now Africa would not fall for the lie of innocent aid organizations. It would know their true faces because the documents seized that night had shown that actually invasion plans were hidden under the guise of aid.